All right, this is going over the sample free response question here on the Chapter 6 Part 2 practice test. And I just realized there's a flaw in this question. I must have not pasted all of it in here. But basically, we've got to take this 2D array and then compute the temp given a row and column as the input. So what the setup kind of looks like, I'm going to do it in Eclipse here. But basically, we have a 2D array that actually is not passed into the method. It just exists as like a global variable inside of this class. And then they pass in the row and column that they want to compute the temp for. Okay, and how the temp is computed is they have some pretty good examples here. Is basically they're going to take the row column. So row, if they pass in row of 2 and column of 3, that's going to be the spot that's highlighted here. And then the way they compute the temp, like the way they say to do it, is average the ones around it. So you got to go 1 up, 1 to the right, 1 down, and 1 to the left. And you're going to average all those. So you're going to add them up and divide by 4. Okay, so they do another example here real quick. Let's just clear the ink. But they basically just say, okay, another example would be like 1, 1. So that would be this spot here. And then you would return the average of the 4 around it. Okay, and then the tricky part being if you're on the edge. So they do an example here of 0, 2, which would be this spot right here. So the problem here is you can't do the average of the 4 because there's no value up above it. So they just say if it's on the edge, right, just return the value that was already there, which is 100. So basically anything along this edge, this edge, this edge, or this edge, we just return the same old value. Okay, so basically it's going to be an if, saying if you're on the edge, return the value that was already there in the row and column that's passed in. And then if it's not on the edge, then do the average of the 4 around it. Okay, so basically the first part is we got to do an if check to see if we're on the edge. Okay, and so that's a little bit tricky, but if we think here, basically if I'm on this edge up here, my row would be 0. Okay, similarly, if I'm on this edge here, my column number is 0. Okay, so the first part of the if check, it says if the row is equal 0 or the column equal 0. And again, I'm trying to check if I'm on the edge. Okay, and then the other two edges are a little tricky. Basically, this last column would be the number of columns, which is 6 minus 1. Okay, so we're going to do if the column equals the number of columns, which is the 2D array, take a position, dot length, whoops, minus 1. Okay, so if, I'm going to put this on a new line because it's getting kind of out of control here. Right, so if the column equals the number of columns, this is how you do number of columns again in a 2D array. Take one of the arrays and call that length. Okay, and then the other final check here is this to see if we're in the last row, and that would be number of rows minus 1. So if row is equal to number of rows minus 1, we're also on the edge. So that's the final piece of this. So I'm going to add one more or, which is if the row equals the number of rows, which is just temps.length minus 1. Okay, so that's basically saying if we're on the edge. Sorry, that looks really wonky. I feel like I should line this up or something. I don't know. Hopefully this looks a little better now. So it's one big or. Okay, and if we're on the edge, I'm just going to return the value that was already there. So that's just temps row column, which is, again, the information being passed into the method here. Okay, and again, we can kind of see that in our description. Here's the row and column that they're passing in. And we're saying if these values are on the edge, return the one that was already there. Right, return the one that's already at that spot. Okay, so else this would be we are not on the edge. Okay, so this is going to be a different thing. Now we got to average the 4 around it. Okay, and so the trick to this is to realize that if we are, let's see. All right, so let's just say here's RC. So R is 2 and C is 3. But basically, we just got to figure out what would be, what would be the R and C if I went up one. Okay, and you can see that we'd actually be in the same column, but the row would have just decreased by 1. Right, this was row 2, now we're at row 1. So this one would be, the generic version would be, that would be 1 less than the row in the same column. Okay, and then I would kind of pause the video here and see if you can find the other ones. Okay, but this one should be the row increased by 1 and the column's the same. Here the row is still 2, still the same, but then the column would have decreased by 1 because we were in column 3 and now we're in column 2. And then the last one here is same row but column up by 1. Okay, so when I sum, I'm going to sum these 4 spots. Okay, so what that looks like in code is I'm going to do a double because I'm worried about integer truncation. And I'm just going to call it sum and just add up those spots. So I'm going to do temps, right? And then instead of doing row column, I'm going to adjust them like was shown in that last picture. All right, so the spots are row and then column plus 1. And then row and column 1 less. These are just, again, the 4 surrounding spots. And then the other one is add 1 to row and keep column the same. And then the last one is minus 1 from row and keep column the same. Okay, and I add them all up. And then I'm just going to return the average. So I'm going to return sum divided by 4. And since sum is a double, hopefully that'll avoid integer truncation. Okay, so that's basically it, how you compute the temp. Okay, great. Thanks for watching.